Hi, Kim. Can you all hear me? Okay, cool. Am I sufficiently non-echoey without the earbuds? Okay, I'm seeing, please start. You sound good. All right. Let me pull up. Oh, and I'm wearing my celiac shirt for the occasion. I'm not being trendy. I have the disease. Okay, so I don't have slides, but I will at least share my Twitter handle up front. If you have questions afterwards that I didn't have time to address in real time or in the stream chat, definitely tweet at me. Feel free. So first, a content warning and a disclaimer. I will be discussing food and I will be discussing chronic illness. And I live in the US, and so this talk will be US focused just because that's my purview. Some other countries are way ahead of the US in terms of allergen labeling and food safety. And if anyone wants to sponsor me a visa to Canada long term, let me know. So my goal is to make it easier for people to eat safely in work settings and to access the full employee experience. Yes, I said people, not disabled people, because it turns out that, like most accessibility things, the outcomes of providing accessibility tend to be more broadly beneficial. Yay, universal design. So before I dive in, why the focus on tech? Aside from the fact that this is a tech conference, eating at work is certainly not unique to the tech industry. Over the years, I had a number of jobs before my pivot into security. And I've certainly had instances through those of eating in work settings, bringing my lunch to work, office picnics, expensing meals while traveling. When I worked for the University of Wisconsin, their Employee Appreciation Day was everyone gets a free ice cream from the dairy school. But I have never worked in another space where eating food together on the company dime was not only a central part of the work experience, but also a tool for fostering a sense of community and belonging. For those of us with disability-related dietary restrictions, however, this can end up having the opposite effect, becoming a detractor of physical and psychological safety, as well as, in some cases, career advancement. But the fact that we have all of this amazing free food flowing like tap water means that there are opportunities. This makes our industry incredibly well-resourced to be able to do better by our employees. We have the resources available to improve the quality of life for everyone that we work with. So why me? Why am I talking about this? I am a security awareness program manager at HubSpot, and I am part of the 1 to 2% of the population that has celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease where, as I recently joked on Twitter, my body thinks that gluten is a nation state adversary named fancy beer. And it turns out when your gut is attacking itself, the rest of your body doesn't work as well. So you end up with things like brain fog, fatigue, joint pain, nutrient deficiencies. This topic is near and dear to me, not only because I live it firsthand, but also because as a security professional, accessibility is important for security to build trust. Thinking back to previous roles pre-diagnosis where I would run internal security trainings and workshops and order catering for them, I had so many missed opportunities to be more inclusive with my food budget. My job is to help the business succeed by building bridges between security and the rest of the company. So if my operations are hindering psychological safety, I'm effectively undermining the mission of my security team. We all have an amazing opportunity to build psychological safety by not only providing good security service, but by being mindful of our colleagues' needs as whole people. And I'm not alone. We're not edge cases, even though we're typically viewed as such. So a few stats on that. I mentioned 1 to 2% of the population has celiac disease, and it's heavily underdiagnosed. Offline, I would be happy to rant about my multi-year diagnostic process with the It's Just Anxiety industrial complex. Aside from that, 5 to 10% of population has food allergies. 0.5% of adults have type 1 diabetes. 8.5% of adults have type 2. 1% have Crohn's disease. 4 to 15% of the population have autoimmune diseases overall, which encompasses celiac, type 1 diabetes, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, but others may have other anti-inflammatory dietary needs too. I have friends with fibromyalgia, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, who are all on some form of restricted diet to be able to manage their symptoms. And there are some amounts of overlap between some of these, but the point is, we're not as edge casey as we're treated in terms of our food needs. While you might not have thought of some of these as disabilities, remember, eating is an activity of daily living. It's necessary for survival, and our ability to do that without a detriment to our health and safety is impacted in one form or another. So we're going to talk about some of the ways to make this essential activity more accessible in our tech industry jobs. While accessibility to disability accommodations is often left up to each of us as individuals to seek out, and sometimes there are a lot of hoops to jump through, we're going to set our sights instead on creating more accessible defaults at an organizational level. So we'll go over some of the foundational basics, some of the pipeline process, your actual settings, and eating together as a group. So some basics. These are foundational things that aren't necessarily specific to folks with disability-related dietary restrictions, but again, it turns out that most disability accommodations are things that have the potential to be beneficial for everyone. And these basics are also things that you can make public and easy to figure out, which will help encourage disabled prospective employees to apply, because trust me, we're looking very hard at what working for a company is going to look like. And the more that you can make that apparent up front, you'll save a lot of people a lot of time with being able to streamline that, figuring out the mutual fit. First, fair and transparent pay. This was a common theme in a few other talks too. Life is often more expensive for those of us with dietary restrictions, not just because of potentially higher medical bills, but non-perishable and processed foods often have to go through more rigorous safety protocols and certifications around shared equipment and removing cross-contamination. So they often end up costing more. Or companies just know that they have a captive audience and so they can rack up the price. And other things like produce and meat that may be less of a common allergen are things that are more expensive by default. So pay us money, please. Tell us how much you're going to be paying us. Remote flexibility and schedule flexibility is one of the biggest things that you can do as a disability accommodation. And I'm so annoyed at how many offices are shoving everyone back to an office before the pandemic is even over. Not only does remote work allow us to be close to our own kitchens and our safe food and our own bathrooms, but it gives us more freedom to be able to ride the waves of our disabilities. For those of us in particular with chronic illness, we're never going to be 100% symptom-free, no matter how much we stay on top of managing our symptoms. We're going to have periods where we're low on spoons or we're having a literal shitstorm. So it's much harder to manage our health from an office than from our own home. Good employee health insurance and disability insurance obviously go a long way. Beyond the basics of those, if your company offers any kind of wellness benefit, sometimes I've only seen this extend to a gym membership. So I would encourage you to expand your definition of what wellness can mean. So consider covering things like CSAs, meal prep kits, dietitians, things that make it easier for your colleagues to afford eating safely to sustain themselves. Now, let's talk about the lunch interview, which fortunately is not happening as much right now in pandemic times. I'm probably going to say this in some form several times during the presentation. The absence of an ingredient does not guarantee the presence of safety. Tattoo that on your forehead. Pre-diagnosis, I went through a handful of lunch interviews as both a candidate and an interviewer. And honestly, I used to get excited by not only getting a free meal out of it, but by introducing a visiting candidate to favorite lunch spots. On the way out the door, I would usually very diligently and politely ask, by the way, do you have any dietary restrictions? And I've gone through multiple workshops on interviewing people inclusively, but it didn't even occur to me until later on just how much of a loaded question this is and how much it opens up the entire interview process to bias and how the lunch interview itself can invite bias. If you have disability-related dietary restrictions, it becomes a calculation between hunger and having a reaction, and neither one of those is a good option for being able to be present for your interviews after lunch. So why are we doing these? The two main arguments that I've heard in favor of the on-site lunch interview are both things that we can find great alternatives for. One is, well, we need to make sure candidates get lunch when we bring them in for an all-day on-site. Do we need to bring them in for an all-day on-site? All day is a long time to be on for so many people, not just disabled people with dietary needs. Consider whether it's actually essential to your interview process. If you absolutely need to bring people on site, shorten the day. We'll let them be on their own for the meals that they need to eat. Most of the on-sites that I conducted in the before times included at least one Zoom interview anyway. So why does the candidate need to be in an office to interview someone in a different time zone? The other main argument that I hear is the real worldness of it. Lunch interviews show how people will treat wait staff, whether they'll be rude, what they look like when their guard is down, how do they handle going out for business lunches, all of that. But we go through an entire lineup of behavioral interviews asking, tell me about a time when, and waiting for the STAR method. All of these conversational scenarios to gauge a candidate's character, their values, and their skills. Why are we zeroing in on the lunch interview as the one real world, real-time scenario? It's not people's job to eat food in front of us. So why are we making that the thing that can make or break an interview? In effect, making someone order food in front of you has the potential to set the candidate up to look difficult. If you bring me to an unfamiliar restaurant that I've had no time to research, I'm going to ask for the manager. I'm going to ask a lot of questions of the wait staff, and I'm going to request very specific pared down meal, like, hey, can you bring me a steak with just some salt and pepper prepared in a clean pan and some vegetables on the side with nothing on them? If they bring me a salad with croutons, I'm sending it back. I can't eat a salad with the croutons picked off because crumbs are enough cross-contamination for me to get sick. What I'm doing really is trying to protect my safety and communicate my needs clearly. But to an outside observer, I just look like an asshole, and I'm not getting that job. So I'll say that if you do insist on conducting lunch interviews, do extensive research in advance on some allergen-friendly restaurants. There are apps out there that can help with this, like Find Me Gluten Free for gluten, and other restaurant finding apps for other allergens. But be prepared for conditions to change. Especially now, supply chain issues can lead to a lot of ingredient substitutions or relaxing of allergen protocols. And also this does mirror how we actually have to go about finding restaurants. So welcome. We use a lot of executive function. So lunch interviews aren't happening as much during the pandemic, thankfully. And I hope that doesn't change. Millennials, we've killed bar soap, we've killed napkins. Let's kill the lunch interview. This millennial would very much like that. So when people have a job, let's talk next about the office. As I mentioned, remote flexibility helps immensely. But that's also kind of like me saying, just patch it. We can't always get that exact perfect foundational scenario. Some people might need to be in an office. And honestly, some people, even if they have a dietary restriction that's disability related, they may actually prefer working from an office. And so they should be able to do that without it being a huge insurmountable obstacle. Again, the goal is to make the full employee experience accessible. Turn every opportunity to be othered into an opportunity to be included, rather than paring away the opportunities. So before we even get to the office kitchen, let's take a tour through some of the other facilities considerations. Think about what your policy is on service dogs, because this is not only good for people who have mobility or vision needs. Diabetics use them sometimes to help monitor their blood sugar. Celiacs and people with wheat allergies or the gluten intolerance can also use them. One of the co-hosts of the Celiac Project podcast has a gluten sniffing service dog, which is so cool. And if I weren't allergic to dogs, I would be training one right now. Make sure that you have fridges that actually have room for employee food and aren't just packed to the gills with LaCroix all the time. LaCroix does not have calories, and any calories for your employees are better than no calories for your employees. You want to make sure that you have space set aside for people to bring their own safe lunch foods, and in the case of type 1 diabetics, store their insulin. If you have first aid kits around the office, put Benadryl in them. This is really helpful for people with food allergies. Obviously, if they're having an anaphylactic reaction, they might have an EpiPen with them, but even if their reaction is more mild, Benadryl is really useful. Easy access to bathrooms is critical. I have worked multiple jobs where there was not a bathroom on the same floor that I was on. And I mentioned the literal shitstorm before. And yes, this does happen when you have a digestive related illness. Also, in the bathrooms, consider what kind of soap you're using. Oftentimes, the boring ass corporate soap is safer than some stuff that's all natural and organic, but is also made with nuts or milk. So, office snacks. First of all, if you do have an office and you have the budget to, I would still recommend providing some kind of snacks if you can, rather than just saying we're not going to have, not everyone can eat our snacks, so no one can. You can make safe options available. There are a lot of ways to do that. And having snacks around is really useful, especially if you're in a role where you have a lot of meetings or you're on call, and sometimes you just need a quick bite. So some ways to think about this. Think in terms of Venn diagrams rather than individual restrictions, because for some of us, dietary restrictions are a package deal, buy one, get 7 or 8 free. As a personal example, quite a few celiacs are also lactose intolerant because gut damage can damage our ability to produce lactase. But there are a lot of top allergen-free brands out there, so those are good options. I have props. So a few of these, and they list the things that they're free of, like eggs, milk, soy, nuts. So like 88 Acres chocolate protein bar. That's it. Fruit snack. Free to be sunflower butter cups. These are basically like Reese's except with sunflower butter instead of peanut butter. Sun butter, individual sunflower butter cups. Chomps meat sticks. These aren't billed as top allergen free, but they're gluten free and free of a lot of other stuff, and they're no sugar. It's great for diabetics. So things like that. If you're a larger company with a cafeteria in the office, I've never worked in a place like that, but I've been in a few of them before I was diagnosed for lunch interviews and just meeting up with friends. At the very least, make sure there are alternate ways for employees to eat lunch, because again, just because something isn't in a dish doesn't mean it wasn't cross-contaminated somewhere along the way. Learn about supply chain security and you'll be an expert in food safety. But if you've come to the point of being able to provide this great cafeteria for your employees, consider additional training for your kitchen staff on allergen safety, how to prevent cross-contamination, maybe having some things that are clearly labeled and prepackaged set aside. And yes, prepackaging is okay. It's a safety concern. The decimation of the planet is not on the backs of your disabled employees. So we've started to get into the realm of eating together. So let's talk about team activities. When team bonding activities revolve around the shared experience of eating or preparing food, like taking a cooking class, decorating cupcakes, things like that, exclusion can occur. So make sure people have a space to safely voice concerns And make sure opportunities for connection and career advancement aren't always solely tied to sharing meals or alcohol, but that's another show. And please do not surprise people with food. I asked before I started my new job, since they will send new hires a box of swag, is there anything edible in this? Just to double check, because I've had edible swag show up before. It was not helpful. I had surprise cookies show up for a team event once. And even though I wasn't diagnosed at the time, I would have been very upset if, after painstaking efforts to get all the gluten out of my kitchen, a box of gluten showed up. You're never required to disclose dietary restrictions to managers and peers, and they may never fully understand your specific needs. So managers, please trust your people and give them some agency rather than making assumptions around their dietary needs. Get curious rather than going into fix-it mode. One way to sort of level off the playing field for employees around team events, we actually did this early on in my new job. There are some services where you can buy everyone a snack box, but let them customize what they actually can put in it. And then they have a box of snacks for a team event that you're going to have together. I think this platform we use is called Snack Magic. I'll have to check. But there are a bunch of dietary restrictions you can sort by, and then you can pick out exactly what you're getting on work time. And another way to do this is expensing meals. If you have corporate cards, that's even better, but I know it's not a thing everywhere. Those of us with severe dietary restrictions are often left with limited and more expensive meal options. So one of the things I'll say on expensing meals is take what you think a typical lunch should cost and double it. That's your baseline. Make sure meal expensing can include grocery stores, just in case there are literally no restaurants around for us to safely order some food from for a remote team event. And make sure that it can allow for flexibility in buying several meals worth of food at once if, say, you're traveling for work. I'm not going to dive too much into work conference travel because that could be an entire other talk on its own, but I've been on security conference staff in one form or another for almost 7 years, and I'm happy to consult with people who are conference organizers on food safety considerations if you're considering providing food for your attendees or your staff. But one thing I'll say from the company side is for work travel, make sure that your hotel booking and expensing policy allows for lodging with kitchens. A lot of times, even if we're traveling to a big city that has a lot of dietary restriction-friendly eating options, they're not necessarily going to be close to where we need to be, and they may not deliver. We may be limited in time. So it's helpful for us to have a space where we can prepare our own food. And don't assume that if a work conference does offer food to attendees, that we won't still need to expense a meal then. Venue catering can't always guarantee no cross contact. So to bring it all together, the fact that I'm talking about expensing snacks and business travel may sound really, really bougie. And yeah, the tech industry is kind of bougie in a lot of ways, but it's also an indicator of the resources that our industry has to be able to do better by our disabled employees. As Jess Schultz put it in their talk earlier, eating is at the base of the dependency tree. I really like that analogy. The bottom of Maslow's pyramid is another way to do it. All this to say, food safety is not a first world problem. So my call to action to each of you, whether you are just an industry peer, somebody who is a people manager for someone with a dietary restriction, disability related or not, if you are responsible for ordering food for your work at any time, you don't need to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Identify one thing that you can change that will have a positive impact on the well-being of your colleagues or direct reports with disability-related dietary restrictions. You don't have to be perfect in all of this and change your entire org every night, but doing the work is an awesome step because we have the tools to be able to do that work. And eating safely and having a sense of belonging are among our most basic needs of survival. And our best work happens when those needs are met by default in the spaces we share and we don't have to beg for them. So, ready or not, here we come. And since I finished a few minutes ahead of time, I'm happy to take questions. I don't know what the best format to do that is. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention, since I didn't mention alcohol in the workplace, one of the reasons I didn't is there's a great talk on that already. My former manager, Jamie Tomasello, gave a talk on that at 2018 in Black Hat, at Black Hat. I think it's called Holding On for Tonight, Addiction in Infosec, something along those lines. And Jamie talks about experience being in recovery from alcohol use and being in the alcohol-soaked security industry. So for that, I'd highly recommend watching Jamie's talk. Kim says, I can share Twitch questions here. Okay, cool. And if not, please tweet at me. I'm happy to be a resource. I know what I've shared isn't entirely comprehensive, but it's a starting point, and I would love to hear what your office has done or what's worked for you. No questions so far. Okay. Well, if not, I can always end a couple minutes early too. Kim has a question. Fire away. Kim, if you're speaking, I can't hear you. Oh, how should employers approach employees with the dietary needs question? Can you clarify? How should a boss ask an employee? How should employees are never required to disclose that, and I think that's kind of putting them on the spot, honestly, to ask them so directly. But what I would say is the best thing you can do as a manager is try to build trust and psychological safety to make space for it to be okay for an employee to disclose that. Do you think it's discrimination if an employer provides treats but not for someone who's lactose intolerant? I'm not a lawyer, so I using the strict sense of employee discrimination in terms of legal things, I'm not the right person to ask that. But I think regardless, one thing to bear in mind is, there's, I don't know, there's like, for a small business, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I have ADHD too, by the way, because there's the high comorbidity of brain stuff and gut stuff. Discrimination is a tough one because I don't know how much of the definition of it comes down to the actual intent versus the impact, and intent does not excuse impact, but I don't know. Suggest language around requesting a dietary stipend. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is, again, that equal opportunity to have full access to the full employee experience. So I think get into kind of hair splitting things, but yeah. For a small business, any potential approach like the Snack Magic box that would be affordable. Depends on your budget, but I think one other thing too is there are, is Kelly Braun here? Is there brands out there that are not necessarily super expensive that you can certainly buy that aren't necessarily going to break your bank in terms of, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Sorry, am I over my time now? I can't tell. I don't remember if I had till 2 or till 2:10. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm for the small business question. I'm not entirely, I think it depends on what your budget is, and figuring out options that work within your budget. And so, I don't know, but if you're, yeah, there are, yeah, I guess I would say there are different ways to approach making sure everyone can eat that don't necessarily involve spending a lot of money buying people snacks. So again, going back to basics, like making sure they can work remotely, making sure that buy Visa gift cards. Yeah, those are great. And honestly, I would recommend like some of the prepaid cards rather than like gift cards to specific like delivery services, because sometimes delivery services can be limited in your safe options available, and also a lot of special notes for dietary needs can get lost in translation if you're ordering things online those way. But yeah, just having some kind of stipend for people to be able to buy their own food would be cool. But also you could pay them more money. The food issue is tough for people with eating disorders too. Yes, this is a big one. And this is another thing where especially the lunch interview can be really destructive because you're putting someone on the spot and evaluating them on their performance of doing something that may be really traumatizing for them. Yeah, religious needs. Yeah, I once referred a friend to a job that was open at the place I was working at the time. And this person was an Orthodox Jewish. And I discovered that pretty much the only place in town that offered kosher food was the Chabad house on campus. And it would have been really tough to bring them for an on-site interview. So yeah, again, with the theme of accessibility tends to have a beneficial impact way beyond disability. Yes, no more work parties with necessary booze. Yeah, never force anyone to drink ever at all. Yeah. But there are so many ways to get creative with your various team bonding activities. And there may be some that are more exclusionary to certain people. It's why having that ability to anonymously and safely speak up and share your particular needs is really important. Like I remember a previous in-person security team activity at a previous role. We ended up like having a team activity during an internal tech conference and splitting the afternoon into 2 groups because some of us were doing an escape room. Some of us really had aversions to escape rooms for reasons of like claustrophobia or things like that. And so I don't remember what the other group did, but there are infinite things that you can do together as a team socially that don't revolve around food. All right, cool. Since there aren't any other questions, I will turn it back to Kim. Thank you so much. Again, feel free to tweet at me. For those who are just listening and not have the screen on, I'm just holding up my Twitter handle, The Sweet Cat, and that's cat with a K, Kilo Alpha Tango. Thanks.